Now, if you have your Bibles, open up with me to Psalm 22. Our scripture text for this morning is going to be Psalm 22. And as you find your place there, I want you to think about how in so many different areas of life, there is a difference between what we feel and what is real, or what we think in our mind we're doing, seeing, experiencing, expressing, and then how other people see or perceive us. See, for all you golfers out there, there's a saying in golf instruction that there's a difference between feel and real. And give a shout out to Dave Lindemulder and Kurt Furno. A couple weeks ago, we were all out playing golf, and the company was wonderful, but the game was not. And I personally was struggling. And on the last hole, Kurt waited till the last hole to say, do you know that you're actually, and he told me that I was setting up in a way that was all cattywampus and out of whack. And I said, no, can't be. He said, give me the phone. And then he recorded me taking one swing. And then when I saw the swing, I was shocked and embarrassed, because what the mental image and picture that I had in my mind of what I was doing, and then what I was actually seeing on the camera, were two very different things. And so all of you know this. So like golfers, there's often in our mind, we look like this. But in reality, we often look like this. Or you think about it, some of you, be honest. You know that at weddings or different things, when you hit the dance floor, you think you look like this. But in actuality, you look like this. And there's so many things where there is a difference between what we're perceiving, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and what is actual. It's why every person shudders when they hear the sound of their voice, and your initial reaction is, I can't sound like this. There's no way I sound like this. Now that distinction between what we feel and what's real, feel and real, is going to be very important in understanding and making sense of the passage we're going to look at this morning and next week. Because this Sunday is Palm Sunday, and I want to offer for Palm Sunday, this is a meditation on Psalm 22. So for this Sunday, and really this is a meditation to help prepare you for Good Friday. This is a Good Friday meditation, a song about the cross. And for the last several weeks, we've been hovering around this whole section of the Psalms. We've looked at Psalm 27, Psalm 23, Psalm 24, and these are such powerful Psalms because they offer for us an antidote for anxiety. They offer the Lord's prescription for peace. And central to that antidote, central to that prescription, central to the cure for all of our cares is the presence of the Lord. It's the presence of the Lord that David says, this is the one thing I ask for and the one thing that I seek. Even in the midst of storms of where hypothetical fears and actual forsakenness, in the midst, if I can find His presence, I'll be okay. And what he says in Psalm 23, the reason why we do not fear walking through the valley of the shadow of death is because we know that the Lord is with me. His rod and staff comfort me, His presence. But now, right in the middle of this beautiful section offering peace and comfort and encouragement from His presence, it's one of the most emotional and intimate and personal of all of the Psalms. It draws you into the sufferings of first David, then Christ, more than any other place in Scripture. It is the Psalm of the cross. When you look at the gospel accounts, many of them tell you what happened. But this psalm, more than any other place, is drawing you into the emotional intensity of how Jesus felt. This is the Psalm of the Cross. The theme of this psalm comes through in the very first line. My God, why have you forsaken me? So this is the key line. Why have you forsaken me? The center and the heartbeat of our hope is all wrapped around God's presence. And yet right in the middle of this whole section of Psalms celebrating His presence is a song of forsakenness. So how do we make sense of this? All right, as always, one thing that's going to be really helpful is to understand and see the structure of the psalm. And the way Psalm 22 is divided, verse 1 through 21 are Jesus' cry for help, or David's cry for help. And then Psalm 22 through 31 are a song of victory. So this week, as we want to fully enter into emotionally as best we can the cry for help, the cry of desperation. And then on Easter Sunday, we want to enter into as fully and as emotionally as we can the celebration of victory. And both of them are here. And so the banner that needs to wave over this whole psalm is that the suffering of the one is going to lead to the celebration of the many. Say it again. The suffering of the one is going to lead to the celebration of the many. And so this week we want to hear the song of suffering. And then next week we want to sing together the song of celebration. All right, so as we look at verse 1 to 21, it's a series of, how can we explain it? It's a series of almost throbs, of contractions. So think about when you're experiencing deep pain, like a woman's in labor, there's a cycle of contractions where the pain comes on and it grips you and it's intense and piercing. And then there's a moment of relief, then pain, and then relief, pain, relief. That's what this psalm is. There's a cycle of intense pain and then relief. So think about these as contractions of the soul. He's crying out in anguish, and then he's recovering. And you can see there's three of them back and forth. There's what David is feeling, and then what is real. Verse 1 and 2, my God, why have you forsaken me? Verse 6 through 8, I am a worm. Verse 12 through 18, these are what he's experiencing. These are the contractions of pain and agony. And then it's balanced with looking at who the Lord is. So in order to jump right in, we're going to try a little experiment. I'm actually going to take you down to my desk so you can see the text. Now here we're looking at Psalm 22, 1 through 2. And I've got it set up like this because when you're just looking at your normal Bible, especially poetry, sometimes in just the layout that's required to fit, make the Bible fit everything on the page, sometimes it makes it hard to see what's happening in the text. Because I want you to feel the poetic beauty and how skillfully David has structured things so you can be drawn into the emotional force of what's going on. So, Psalm 22, 1 through 2, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? From the words of my groaning. My God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. So you see, this is where it begins. And it begins with a call, a double call, my God, and then the repetition of why? Why have you forsaken me? And why are you so far from saving me? These are his two questions. You've forsaken me and you're far from me. Where are you? And what's he far from? He's far from saving me, and he's far from the words of my groaning. He says, oh my God, I cry. And notice when. This is a totality of crying. I cry by day and I cry by night. During the day, I cry out, but you do not answer. There's no answer. During the day, I'm looking for answers and I can't find any. And then at night, I cry and I find no rest. No answers and no rest. And the central reality is that he feels forsaken. The Lord is far from him. So David is drawing us into his own internal and emotional turmoil. And one of the things he's doing at the very beginning is tapping into one of the deepest fears we all have, that fear of being abandoned. And this is tapping into one of the deepest fears that we have, the fear of being abandoned by those that we love. A couple weeks ago, in our neighborhood, they were showing for the neighborhood Frozen 2 with popcorn and snow cones. And I actually have hit my quota of how many times it's mentally healthy to see Frozen 2. So I was good. So we took the kids and they were all up front playing, and then I kind of moved to the back of the crowd, popped in an audio book, and was thoroughly enjoying the movie. And as I was standing there, a little boy came up to me, panicked and in tears, because it was dark and there was a big crowd and he couldn't find his parents. And he said, will you help me find my mommy? And that primal sense of, I've been abandoned, I've been lost. And that's what David is experiencing here. And the two things he's crying out for is I have no answers, and then there's no rest. I need answers and I need rest. So where does he go? Where does he move to in that situation? Let's look at verse 3 and 5. So Psalm 22, 3 through 5. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. So what David does, notice, yet you are holy and enthroned. In you, to you, in you. These yous are emphatic. There's a focus on God. He is going to give his mind to the greatness of God. He's not going to wallow in his distress. What he actually is going to do is move himself off the scene and then move God into the center. And he's going to focus on God's character. You are holy. You are enthroned on the praises of Israel. He's focusing on God's majesty and his holiness. This is the way out of the darkness. And he's focusing on all creation singing his praise. See, notice the first thing he's going to do to get out is he's going to look up. Look up. But then he also looks back. Notice, in you, our fathers trusted. They trusted you and you delivered them. They cried and were rescued. They trusted and were not put to shame. See, this is the key about how we can set our distress in the proper context. See, they trusted, and were not put to shame. This is the legacy that David's fathers have left for them. It's a legacy of trust. It's a testimony of trust. And the first thing he has to do is look up, but then he has to look back and look at all the ways that the Lord has helped and redeemed and renewed his people. So this is the key. This is how you can put your distress in the proper context. The context of the greatness of God and the faithfulness of his people throughout all the ages. So the question for you is, how can you, in times of where you feel abandoned, how can you turn your gaze vertical? How can you look up? And then notice what he celebrates. He celebrates that the Lord is still enthroned, but he's enthroned on the praises of his people. This is why our actual gatherings matter. This is why we come together and worship, because the Lord is enthroned on the praises of his people. And you know this. You know there's really only 2 times in your life where you sing full voice. You sing that way when nobody's around, or you sing that way when you're in such a crowd of people that no one can hear you. But in times of feeling abandoned, you have to turn your heart to singing praise. And it's helpful to remember that even today, in the midst of darkness and seclusion, even today, the Lord's praises have already been sung. They've been sung in Japanese, they've been sung in Mandarin, they've been sung in Swahili, they've been sung in Korean and Spanish, and we sing them in English. We add our small voice to the massive global choir that's lifting up His name and singing His praises. And then the second thing you saw there is that you have to look back. You look back. You look at the testimony of trust from the family of faith. There's a beautiful Bebo Norman song that says, you can borrow mine. When your faith is weak, you can borrow mine. And so a couple things. If you have a story of God's faithfulness to you, it's not just your story. It was given to you so that you can then give it to others. We comfort others with the comfort that we've received. You know, we're in current full-on superhero mode, and one of our 3-year-old son, who will be turning 4 over this confinement, is obsessed with Spider-Man. And you know the line from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Christians, we have a version of that line. It could be something like, with tender mercies come tremendous responsibilities. So He's given us His tender mercies, and then we have the responsibility to share that with others so they can borrow our faith. And we have the responsibility to know. You need to know how the Lord has helped and redeemed and renewed and been there in times of plague and drought and difficulty for His people. We have 2,000 years of the Good Shepherd caring for His people. Do you know their stories? That's why church history is so important. So you can know the faithfulness of the Lord, and in times of trouble, you can look back and say, our fathers trusted you and you delivered them. So I will trust you, knowing that you will deliver us. But now we move into the next contraction of anguish and pain in Psalm 22, 6-8. And it says, but I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me, they wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let Him deliver him. Let Him rescue him, for He delights in him. And so the sting that David's feeling is he feels abandoned by God, and then he is mocked and ridiculed by people. He's been wounded. Look, he has been scorned and despised by mankind, by people. He's been wounded. And notice he says, I am a worm. I'm not even a man. His suffering has dehumanized him. Then notice probably the over-exaggeration. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. What's that? You need to think of like kids who are sticking out their tongue and making mean faces, and then they wag their heads. That's people with, that's the eye roll. That's the obnoxious, dismissive mocking. But notice what it is that they attack. They attack His trust in the Lord and His delight in Him. The very thing that was bringing him hope and comfort is the thing they attack. And they say, he trusts in the Lord. Let Him deliver him. Let Him rescue him. Oh, you trust in the Lord, do you? Oh, trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understandings. In all your ways acknowledge Him. He'll direct your path. That's what you say. You claim you're trusting in the Lord. And He's directed your path into suffering. Some trust. Either the Lord's not worthy of trust, or you're not worthy of His care. Oh, you delight in the Lord, do you? Well, it says delight yourself in the Lord and He'll give you the desires of your heart. So either some Lord you delight in, or the Lord doesn't delight in you, because look what's happening to you. So here's the question. How do you deal with public humiliation and mockery? See, their rejection hurt him. And then now here's the question. Where does he go when he feels that the whole world is against him? and the whole world is mocking. Where does he turn? Let's look at verse 9 through 11. So 9 through 11, he's going to look back. Yet you, he turns his eyes away from his situation and looks at the Lord. Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. See, he's looking not just at what God has done in the experience of others, but he's looking at his own experience, the own intimate care that he's experienced from childhood when he was cared for. Now notice here's that key word again, trust. Not just have they trusted you, but I have trusted you, and then those gifts that you've given me. There's a play on the word with trust in Hebrew. It sounds like to lie flat on your face. So the image here is that from the moment of childhood, I was laid upon you, and I trusted you. It's the image of a child laying on their parent's chest. He's reminding himself that he was raised in this environment of the tender mercies of the Lord and the Lord's care. And even from his birth, he entered into the atmosphere of grace. And this is such a gift. If you have been given this gift, don't despise it. You know, one of the things that aggravates me, and it's so popular right now, is the easiest way you can get a book contract and get interviewed on CNN and the New York Times is to be an evangelical and write your deconversion narrative. There's been popular authors and YouTubers who have gained notoriety for telling the story about how they were raised in these, fundamentalist, backwards evangelical subculture, and then they saw the light and had the epiphany and have walked out of the darkness and into the light. And it's just aggravating because they're turning their nose up at the incredible mercy it is to be able to say in times of difficulty that you can look back and you can remember the tender mercies and care of the Lord in providing for you the family he did. And so if you are a child right now and you are in your living room watching this, the reason why you're watching this is because your parents are trying, as best they can, they're trying to raise you in that atmosphere and in the atmosphere of grace and mercy. So be thankful for that. Don't despise that, because there will come a time in your life where you're going to feel utterly abandoned by the entire world. And remember where you could go to feel safety and security. If you have that, that's a tremendous gift. Now, if that's not something you've ever had or ever experienced, then notice where David looks. He looks to the Lord and remembers that his trust is ultimately in him. But that is the ray of light that can break through the darkness. But now in verse 12 and verse 18, we move into the final and the ultimate contraction of pain and anguish. Let's look at these verses. So Psalm 22, 12 through 18. Many bulls encompass me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me. Like a ravening and roaring lion, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs encompass me. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So what you can see here is the enemies are closing in, and it's getting much more emotionally and then physically intense. But what I want you to see is how the poetry is intended to express what it wants you to experience. Notice the enemies are here and they encompass me. The dogs, they encompass me. And then here he is in the middle and he's surrounded. So what David is doing with the poetry is he's surrounding you by the enemies, and here you are in the middle. And you can see here, look, the enemies, they're bulls of Bashan, they're roaring lions, they're evil dogs. And this is illustrating the bestial nature of evil. It doesn't just dehumanize David or the victim, it also dehumanizes those who are expressing it. That's what evil does. It makes you less than a person. It's bestial. And then notice how they're surrounded and then they're about to go on the attack. And he says, I am poured out like water. You lay me in the dust of death. Now here in the middle, my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. My strength is dried up. My tongue sticks. See, on the outside is the external, and then on the inside is the internal. So external, my bones are out of joint. My tongue sticks to my jaws. I'm dying of thirst. And then here on the internal, my heart is like wax. My strength is dried up. He's experiencing total disintegration. And they have circled, and then now they come and they strike. And then notice they have pierced my hands and feet. They stare and gloat. They divide my garments among them for my clothing. What have they done? They've circled, and now they strike. And what do? They circle and they stare, and then they circle and then they steal. They strike him, they stare and mock, and then they steal. Now, David is drawing you into this intense suffering, but this is beyond. This is beyond anything that David ever experienced. And so he feels surrounded, but then now he turns back to the Lord, and it is a real cry for help. But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. And then this is really hard to translate. There's a difficult verse here, and the Hebrew is very difficult because it's Alec Mortier in his fabulous devotional commentary on the Psalms, where he gives devotional commentary then a new translation. I would encourage everyone to pick it up. It's so good. And the way the way he translates this, because you flow in the Hebrew and it's save me from the mouth of the lion, the horns of the wild oxen, and then it breaks. There's just a stark break. In essence, there would be an ellipses if it was written in English. And so it's almost like he's looking and the pains of death, the destroyers, the enemy is about to descend, and he sees them, and then it breaks. The horns of the wild oxen. And then there's the ellipses. There's darkness. ... And then the next line is a triumphant, you have rescued me. And that's where we're going to go next week. But for this week, we need to live in the ... So as we turn our attention to the cross and think about Christ's crucifixion, spend some time this week reading the different gospel accounts and see how rich they are with this imagery from Psalm 22. Because here David is actually expressing something more than what he knows. See, David doesn't fully experience this. So this psalm goes beyond anything that David ever experienced. And Jesus actually takes this cry upon himself. And so the question is, for this Good Friday, this Palm Sunday, is why does Jesus quote this on the cross? And one of the things we see is that he's not just suffering on the cross for us, but he's suffering with us. So let's cycle back through these verses and let's look at how everything that David felt is something that Jesus not only felt, was not something that was just a feel, but it was real. It was real for Christ. See, Jesus uses this psalm at his darkest hour to uphold him and sustain him and to explain to us what's happening. Now it's interesting. This is what, at Jesus' darkest hour, this is what comes out of him. What comes out of you at your darkest hour? You know, in some ways, we're like jelly donuts. You want to know what kind of jelly's in us? You got to squeeze it. You can tell by being squeezed. And when you're squeezed, what comes out? See, everything that David felt, Jesus experienced the full reality. Verse 1 and 2, he didn't just feel forsakenness, he experienced real forsakenness. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus is fully experiencing the separation of God's wrath. And there is tremendous mystery here. And he's experiencing, in a way we can't even conceptualize, the full, this separation. And the sting of sin is death, and death's power is separation. But what we see here is that Jesus experienced the reality of divine abandonment so that we wouldn't have to. And he also experienced the reality of full human shame. Think about the shame that he willingly endured. And you read verse 6 through 8 and think about it in the context of them mocking him, the great I am, the first, the last, the beginning, the end, the Alpha, the Omega, and now he's being treated like a worm, less than an angel, less than a human, less than most animals. The Lord of glory is being brought down so low. Why would he willingly experience such open and public humiliation and hostility? And we praise him for the real shame that he endured, and then the real suffering that he walked through. I mean, just look at the passage. And I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. He is experiencing all of this. This is giving you a window into the emotional experience of Christ on the cross. And it's extraordinary. I mean, can it be that the one who holds all things together is having every joint in his body dislocated? Can it be that the one who offers living water, that whoever comes to him will never thirst again, is dying of thirst? And then they have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Why would Jesus sing this song? Why would Jesus willingly and joyfully enter into this? Why would God the Father willingly send his Son to experience this? It's because for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. You know, in our current reality, we're getting a small sneak peek in what that must have been like for the Father. You know, as the stories are mounting, I think one of the saddest things about the deaths that you can read about or people are experiencing is people are dying in the hospital and they can't be with their family. Their loved ones can't come to them. And it's this great tragedy. But how could people endure such a thing? It's because they have to believe that their separation is actually bringing about a greater good. And that's one of the things we see in Psalm 22. The death of the one is going to bring the salvation of the many. Jesus willingly enters into this song and cry of despair so that we wouldn't have to. He intentionally made it real for himself so that we would only feel it. He's taking the full brunt and force of the reality of death, so we only experience the shadow. That's why the psalmist can sing that even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Because he knows that no matter how close death gets, he is only encountering the shadow Because on the cross, Christ is taking the reality.